so you can get started.
Awesome. So I'll just share my screen. Can you guys see that? And can you hear me well? Oh, you're on mute, Amanda.
I'm on mute trying to tell you that I can see and hear you.
Awesome. I'm guessing you'll just go with the have a look at the chat to let me know if there's anything. So any questions, guys? We can make this as interactive as we can. I do know that it's also recorded, so maybe we can do, it really depends what's the best way of going about this. But yeah, if you have any questions, I can look at the chat, or you can put your hand. So, all right, anyways, so for today, I'm going to talk about meta-analysis and meta-analytic structural equation modeling. So MetaSem in short. As Amanda said, I just really love data, any kinds of data. And more recently, I'm starting to get my head around qualitative data and use of machine learning techniques to understand qualitative data. But I am not in any shape or form a qualitative researcher. All right, so a few disclaimers. I would just like to say that I'm not an expert in meta-analysis or MetaSem. This workshop and really all my knowledge in this topic relies heavily in the following textbooks and R packages. So a lot of this stuff is just stuff that I've seen during my PhD, because during my PhD, I did a meta-analysis and have published a few and currently doing a few of them at the moment. So a lot of the stuff that I will tell you guys are from these resources that you can see in the slide. And they're really, really wonderful resources. So, all right. One of the first thing that I usually do when I talk about meta-analysis is to talk about the philosophy of it and why I love it. I like it as much as doing original research. But basically, psychology researchers like G.F. Cummings deemed meta-analysis as the new statistics. And this is, as we know, psychology is going through the replication crisis. I do believe that you don't necessarily need to do a meta-analysis in order to, appreciate this type of methodology. I believe that even having a meta-analytic thinking can help. And we can do this by thinking of our single studies as part of a series, right? So whenever we do our original study, of course, we always think of it as building on past research and to be used by future research. And we can do this and we can cultivate meta-analytic thinking culture within our discipline by making your results available online via open access data or via your personal website. Reporting descriptive statistics like means, standard deviations, and correlations if you're looking at continuous variables, because they are really, really important in calculating effect sizes. I'm going to be involved in my third meta-analysis now, and it just sucks when you're trying to read a study and you're trying to extract data from a study and you're trying to calculate the effect size and you just can't. So that's really, really annoying. And then you have to talk to get in touch with the authors. It's just, a lot of time consuming processes that gets involved when you're doing this, this method, like when you're doing a meta-analysis. Another thing is to report Cornbach's alpha. This is particularly important when you're correcting for effect sizes and any sort of like measures that you've used and how, any changes that you've made within your data set. And yeah, I believe that by having this meta-analytic way of thinking, we can improve our research culture. within the discipline of psychology, and it can help future researchers who are doing meta-analysis within your topic. And also it helps improve your citation. So that's pretty good. Actually, before I start, anyone here, before I go on, I mean, anyone here who have done a meta-analysis before or currently doing one or thinking of doing one? Okay. Oh, that's good. Cool. So sometimes if you want me to use clarify a particular terminology, please let me know. I think some of the terminologies I'm using are quite common in like statistical lingo, but but sometimes maybe I'm using terminologies that is actually not familiar to a lot of you. All right, so steps involved in a meta-analysis. It's very, very similar to doing a systematic review, really. But one of the first things, one of the few things I always say to people whenever I do this workshop or whenever I do, I talk to them about meta-analysis is to please pre-register your study. I know it's optional, but it's highly recommended. By making a plan for your study, you can take notes of any changes that you've made in your plan. This is especially helpful when working with others. So at the moment, I'm working with 3 professors on a road safety meta-analysis. And it's just so important because sometimes, you know, these are really, really great professors, but sometimes they'll think of an idea after making your research plan, and having this pre-registered plan is really helpful of bringing them back within the boundaries of what you've planned to do for your review. So that's just one of the perks of pre-registering your analysis. Prospero and the Open Science Framework website are really good places to pre-register your study because they already give you a template of what you need to talk about and to plan for your study. So this is the Prospero plan that we have applied for in regards to the new meta-analysis paper that I'm currently doing. So as I said, it's the same steps, similar, taken during when doing a systematic review. My pro tip here is the more specific your research question is, the easier the next steps will be. But yeah, so these are usually the steps that you take when doing a systematic review / meta-analysis. Of course, there's specific steps that is involved with meta-analysis. With meta-analysis, when you're extracting and manually coding your variables is probably the most time consuming because you have to look at the numbers and that relates to calculating your effect size. You need to look at the variables that was involved in the study. You also need to look at the measures that has been used to measure the variable that you're interested in, because having different measures can also have an impact in how the effect size are calculated. So the other variables that you need to collect, as I said, information in regards to calculating the effect sizes. And sometimes you may have to do some conversion or corrections in these effect sizes. It really depends on what question you're trying to ask and what effect size you're planning to calculate. This is also a very time-consuming task. And this is an example of the variables that I usually collect when I'm doing my meta-analysis. So I always have a study ID. So I treat the study as if they're, single like participants. So I also put an ID specific for that particular study. And then I also have the year of when the article has been published, what is the sample size. If it's interesting for you, you can do the breakdown of the sample, gender, nationality. I work a lot with workplace research, so that's why I also have industry there. So basically, you collect the variables that you think will have an impact on the relationship that you're trying to study. And as you can see here as well, I also have what is the DV, how is it measured, what is the IV, what are the predictors that you're looking at, and how is it measured, and if I need to contact the author because I don't have all the information I need to calculate the effect size. And then I also have the, of course, the effect size and whether there's any correction that has been applied in the Cronbach's alpha. All right, so that's meta-analysis. You can actually combine meta-analysis and structural equation modeling. So this is what I mean by MetaSem or MASEM. And it combines the advantages of both meta-analysis and SEM for fitting structural equation of models when you have this pool of correlation matrices. Right, this type of analysis is more common in our discipline, so in psychology, which is pretty good, rather than in public health and medicine. And basically, there are two stages in this process. The first one is you combine a pool of correlation matrices to form an average correlation matrix, and then you propose a structural model that will be tested against this correlation matrix. And the MetaSem or MASEM is really great for studies that have an underlying theory. Like, so for example, if you're looking at the theory of planned behavior or the technology acceptance model, right? Because you have the variables that are related to that theory, and usually those variables are studied together in a bunch of different studies. So this is an example of the paper that I've published that has the meta-analysis and MASEM. It has been published last year. So as you can see here, you can see the code that I use for R. And it's quite, relatively straightforward codes. If you're trying to calculate the effect size, sometimes you just need one line of code. But of course, if you're you're looking at different relationships, you just have to write the code multiple times to do that. So this is the R code, and table 5 is the sort of like the results table that is related to that R code. So this is where the MetaSem is sort of like, you can see the process of where it's starting to form. So table 7 have the correlation matrix of the variables that I'm interested in applying the structural equation modeling, right? So you have the R. So basically R means here as a pooled correlation R. So pooled correlation Pearson's R. And then you have the standard error, you have the confidence intervals, and how many studies are related to that particular relationship that you're looking at, right? So once you've coded the matrix correlations, you then can form it into the structural equation modeling that you want to study. And these are all, can be done in 2 packages. So one of the first bit, so here, the normal meta-analytic procedure, I used the metaphor package in R. And for the structural equation modeling, I used the MetaSem package in R developed by Mike Chun. All right. Any questions so far on that? Or maybe we can, or you can ask the questions later. Ooh, Gemma asked, does it have to be done in R? For me, it's just that I know the packages. That's why I do it in R, but, and I will talk about it later, SPSS actually has a meta-analysis function now in the newest version. So I haven't played around with it yet, yep, SPSS have it. So there's also a lot of different software, like the comprehensive meta-analysis software. It's just that those ones are paid. And I think you can, have a free trial version for 30 days. And I think some universities even pay for it. So yeah, you don't have to do it in R, but I know how to do it in R. So that's why I am using the R packages here. So in regards to, aside from the technology use, other tips and tricks that I would like to impart when doing meta-analysis or MetaSem is to do a code book for the variables that you will extract for your meta-analysis. I know this can be a bit pedantic and, it takes a lot of time, but believe me, it will really, really help, especially if you're working with a few different collaborators. This is an example of a code book that I did for one of my meta-analysis. And I have what the column name would be called, what is the description of that variable, what is the type of information, is it going to be numeric, is it going to be text, and what are the potential answers in regards to that particular variable. Another thing is to, I know people probably wouldn't like this tip, but for me, I really do feel like if you're going to use a particular tool, you have to know at least, or like understand what is going on behind the algorithms or the R package, right? So for me, I would say it's really good to know how to read the formula that is used to calculate the pooled effect sizes. And by doing so, you know exactly how each pooled effect sizes is being calculated, because different methods have different corrections in weighting. So for the first time that I did a meta-analysis, I calculated my own pooled effect sizes in Excel. And it was really, really time consuming. But because I did that, I know exactly the how different calculations work. And then by doing that, I can compare that pooled effect sizes from the different packages that is available in R. Another thing that I would like to provide as a tip is to know how to read the documentation of the packages if using R, because again, how they calculate the corrections or the weighting of the calculation of the pooled effect sizes can also differ in how you would do it manually. Another thing that I'd like to give as a tip is when running analysis, write as many comments to yourself or even create a documentation of your code. I know even if you use the SPSS software when doing meta-analysis, please still write as many comments to yourself. And I really like this phrase where it says, write software, not codes. This is particularly helpful when you're doing revision, especially when reviewers are asking you to rerun an analysis again, or you need to add a new studies because it took a while for the paper to be published. Oh yeah, so I wrote here as well, having comments and everything on everything that you do and having documentation is really helpful when you want to run another meta-analysis. Because I have all of these codes and I have all of this documentation, it's so much easier for me to do the next meta-analysis, because I will just change the data frame or the data that is related. And of course, I just need to change the name of the variables. So it's very, very particularly helpful. Another thing of why it's important to create documentation is that it can create be great in building research culture, because then you can share this code with others as others, and I've learned from other people's codes as well. So my way of giving back is to also make sure that I can share this code to everyone. And I know that it takes a lot of time, but it's actually, I think it's worth it. Some of the toolbox that I have in my disposal when doing meta-analysis or MetaSem is the Systematic Review Accelerator. This particular tool has been developed by Bond University, some public health researchers in Bond, and they did a systematic review in 2 weeks based on the tools that they have. And I know it sounds like a clickbait, but they actually did it. And they run a lot of different events and workshops that uses this systematic review accelerator. And as I said previously, the two main packages that I use is Metaphor and Metasem, and of course Tidyverse in regards to anything that in regards to data manipulation. And as I said to Gemma as well earlier, is that SPSS version 28 has a new meta-analysis function. If you go to analyze meta-analysis, you'll find it there. EndNote is another thing that I use a lot when doing meta-analysis. I know that some academics have a love-hate relationship with EndNote, but I've used it so much that I don't know how to use another software. What I usually do is I create a specific output style that is specific to my review when I'm extracting the data details, study details, I mean. There are also existing meta-analysis spreadsheets online. Mine is available in GitHub, and I will be adding more stuff there. So for example, some of the R codes that I use, explaining how I do documentation, how I, what is my process on picking a particular methodology and why, etc., and stuff like that. I will probably put this slideshow online as well using my GitHub. It's a new thing that I'm doing, so there's not a lot of stuff in there yet. So, but yeah, it will be there eventually. And realized that I went through that really quickly. Some of the references and resources, again, I've already talked about some of the textbook and on the methods. So for example, Hunter and Schmidt. So this textbook is really a great read, and it's a good training into meta-analysis. The Hunter and Schmidt method is used a lot in psychology, especially within the organizational psychology area. Chung's book on Metasem is a bit more dense, and it takes a while to get your head around. But once you understand the mechanisms of Metasem, it becomes more digestible, really. And it's a really great companion to the R package that he've developed. So when there's a particular code that you're trying to understand in regards to the R package related to his methodology, he will talk about the theory behind it and why certain calculations are provided that way. But for great starting resources, Andy Field actually has a really great starting reference on meta-analysis. And since we know that it's Andy Field, we know that it would be easy to consume, and he tries to make it interesting as well in his own way. And the Borenstein Introduction to Meta-Analysis is also really a really good starting resource, because even though it's a textbook, it can be read by chapter depending on what you're doing. So if you are doing a meta-analysis on, let's say, gender differences, so when you're looking at group differences, there's a specific chapter for it. But if you're looking at meta-analysis in regards to relationships, there's also a specific chapter for that, and what kind of corrections and how you convert effect sizes. And that's it, really. I just realized I just went through that really quickly. And yeah, if you guys have any questions, then I'm happy to answer. We can use the rest of the time discussing more about meta-analysis and MetaSem.
Claire, that's wonderful, and I think it's great that we have time
Yeah.
to talk through questions, so it's perfect timing. I'll let people sort of formulate questions. I'm happy for those to happen in the chat, or if people want to turn on their audio and or visual screens and chat, that's all good. So while people are forming their questions, I will take this opportunity as the chair to ask you the question, Claire.
Okay.
Which is back in terms of your developing a plan, right? We all need a plan. And I think it's really great to tie that to pre-registration. I've not actually done a pre-registered piece, and I just wondered if you could tell me a little bit about actually like the process of registering something, and sort of what do you need to know? How time consuming is that? Just things that if some of us haven't done that before, a bit about that whole element to it.
Sure, of course. It's, for me, if you think of it as writing your ethics application, you know how in your ethics you have to write your research background, what are your research questions, what are your hypotheses. It's a similar process, and in some ways it actually makes you, I think, a stronger researcher, because from the beginning you know exactly where your study would go. And what is good with Prospero and OCF is that there's already a template of what you need to do in order to, like, they already have questions. So for example, it would say, what is the background? And it doesn't even need to be like very detailed. You can just put your hypothesis and your research question. And another thing that I would say, that don't be scared to pre-register your study, because if you do deviate for those research questions, it's okay. Like you can, and I listened to this podcast by Brian Nosek, and he said, it's not to lock in your, let's say you're looking at meta-analysis on a particular thing, and then you realize, oh, there's a moderator that keeps coming up, but you didn't pre-register it. It's okay to deviate as long as you say why and you explain yourself. And so, yeah, so I would say in regards to time consuming, it's not as different as doing an ethics application. Yeah.
I think that's good to know, because you know it's sort of that scary unknown expert.
Yeah.
But I agree. It sounds like it really would help you formalize your question and your parameters, which I think is really important for this type of work.
Yes, exactly. And yeah, and as I said, this really helped, especially when you're having collaborators, because then when they try to start changing the research question, you can be like, I'm sorry, we've already pre-registered the study. We can do that in the next one.
Yeah. Great. Does anybody have questions for Claire? Claire, I have another question about this registration aspect, because is another benefit perhaps that you can see that you're asking a question that isn't being asked by somebody else? Is there sort of a way of reviewing what people are already tackling?
Yep, definitely. So if you go to Prospero, it's already it's a database of pre-registered studies. So that is another way that you can, help in reducing the time consumption of research is that if somebody is already working on it, then you're kind of like, okay, I need to change. Because if you've published a paper and just a month, like you started doing your your research, and then just after 1 month somebody has published a paper within that, then yes, so there definitely Prospero has you can search the database as well as OSF, the Open Science Framework. You can look at the databases that and see if this particular review has already been so if somebody's working on that already.
Yeah, fantastic.
And you can use that database as well to form your ideas too.
Great. I'm just keeping my eye on the chat. I haven't seen anything else come through. Please do ask questions. Gemma, you've turned your mic on, so I'm hoping you have a question.
Yeah, but I mean, I'm very, very basic in this world, but maybe if I jump in, everyone will go, oh, my question was really not that bad. So I'm actually wondering, how do you know how much research you need out there to actually conduct a meta-analysis?
Ooh, like for are you saying like how many studies do you need in order to do a meta-analysis, or how do you even decipher the vastness of our research world?
I guess the first one, you know, like
Okay.
the first one to start with, but the second one is also a good question.
Well, the first one is that in some, it really depends. I guess it's like, you know, when they say, what is the appropriate sample size? It's a lot of, there's some people that says a number of like 3 studies is enough to look at a particular relationship. So let's say you wanted to look at the relationship of maybe creativity and music interest, or like interest in rap. I don't know. If you just need like at least 3 studies in order for you to form a meta-analysis in regards to that particular variable that you're looking at. So it's not that much. In regards to the second question, this is where pre-register helps, because by looking at different keywords, you can look at different database, and it will give you a hit. So for example, if you put creativity, music interest, and rap, and it gives you like 200 articles, then you can be like, okay, you know what, maybe my research question isn't specific enough. So maybe you can make it more specific or make it broader. So if you have a particular question, then that it's you're only getting like 20 studies in your research, and when you're doing the search terms database, then you might want to broaden the research question a bit more. So yeah, those are the 2 ways.
Claire, I'm wondering, you're talking about, doing this with collaborators, and I wonder if you could speak a little bit about how you break up the work or allocate the work if you are working with more than just yourself.
Okay, that's a good one. So for me, it's always good to have, always good to have 2 people doing your review. But there have been some people who have done meta-analysis or reviews by themselves. And if you're doing a review by yourself, from what I understand, what you do is to make sure that you're not making data errors or stuff like that. You just have to do like randomly look at papers and then see if you've made any error. So you're sort of like keeping yourself accountable. So once you've done your analysis or data extraction, you collate, like, let's say 10% of the data, and then you look at it again and double check. But in regards to working with collaborators, what I usually do is when you're doing the title or abstract review, you allocate it to one person, and then another person can have a look at it, and you have a third reviewer to see if there's a difference in whether a study should be included or not. So 3 is the best number in regards to doing reviews. So yeah, it really is whose strength is which part. So for example, with this particular meta-analysis that I'm working with, professors in road safety. So they are like their ideas are the ones like, this is what terms we need to include, this is how we will approach this paper, but I'm doing all the data stuff. So that can also be another way that you can sort of divvy up the skills between you. But yeah, there's definitely like action points that needs to happen. So for example, whether an article should be included or excluded in the review, and you just need to find someone who's available to do that at that time.
So just on that, how sort of subjective can those things be? Like, because they're quite, like the rules are pretty like straightforward, aren't they?
Not necessarily sometimes. So this is funny. So this meta-analysis I'm doing, so there's 3 road safety professors done research on this area. They have excluded their own studies in the review, even though this is what we're writing on. And I'm like, what is happening with you guys?